is the
Vampire
moment
King
we've
laughed when
waited
she
for.
confessed her love.
Take the cup,
She made
join
sure
me
he'd
in this
regret it.
toast to our victory.
Moonlight spilled over the jagged cliffs surrounding the ancient castle, its silver glow cutting through the dark clouds like a blade. Inside the grand hall, high above the world of mortals, Lady Alara walked with quiet steps, her heart a tempest of courage and fear. Tonight she would do something no one had ever dared, confess her love to Kale, the Vampire King. The castle was silent except for the soft echo of her shoes on marble. Torches flickered along the walls, their flames dancing against the stone like restless spirits. Alara's hand rested on the carved wooden railing of the balcony, and she inhaled deeply. She could feel the pulse of the kingdom in the stillness, the life of mortals and immortals intertwined, balanced by centuries of fear and loyalty. Kale waited for her in the throne room. The hall was vast, the ceilings high enough to touch the clouds if one dared to dream. Shadows pooled in the corners, but the throne itself was illuminated by an ethereal light that seemed to rise from the king himself. Kale's figure was imposing, wrapped in the dark robes of royalty, his presence more than commanding, it was magnetic. His eyes, sharp and deep, were like liquid night, holding the weight of centuries. When Alara stepped inside, her breath caught. He did not rise from his throne, nor did he speak. He only watched, and that was enough to make her knees weak. "Lady Alara," he said finally, his voice smooth and low, like silk brushing against stone. "To what do I owe the honor of your presence in the dead of night?" Alara straightened her back, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice steady though her heart hammered in her chest, "I have come to speak of something personal." Kale's lips curved into a faint, amused smile. "Personal. How rare for mortals to dare speak of the heart in my presence." Alara swallowed, clenching her fists at her sides. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, yet standing here, the words felt fragile, delicate, almost too small to bridge the chasm between them. I love you," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I have loved you for a long time. I know I am mortal and I am nothing compared to you, but my heart, it belongs to you." The room fell silent, save for the faint crackling of the torches. Kale tilted his head, observing her as though she were an intricate painting, one he had never quite studied. Then, without warning, a low, echoing laugh filled the hall. "You love me." His laugh was not cruel at first. It was rich, deep, like the echo of a cathedral bell. But soon it became clear it carried a sharp edge. A mortal girl daring to speak of love to a king who has seen centuries pass. That is amusing. Alara's cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and anger. Her hands trembled, but she held her ground. "I am not here to amuse you, your Majesty. I am here to speak the truth." Kale leaned back in his throne, his eyes gleaming like dark stars. "The truth," he murmured almost to himself, "is a dangerous thing, especially when it comes from those who have so little power." Power. The word stung. Alara had known it would. In Kale's world she was fragile, a flicker of light in the shadow of his eternity. And yet her heart refused to bow. "I may be mortal," she said, her voice stronger now, "but my heart is my own. It is not afraid of you or your power or the centuries you have seen. I speak this now because I cannot keep it inside any longer." Kale's laughter faded, replaced by a silence so deep it pressed against her chest. For a moment, she thought he might rise and dismiss her, as he had done with so many before. But instead, he regarded her quietly, as though he were weighing the value of her words against the weight of his own immortality. "Do you truly understand what you say?" he asked finally, his tone softening slightly, though still edged with amusement. "To love me is to invite pain, loss, and longing beyond mortal comprehension. Do you still wish to continue, knowing what it could mean?" Alara's chest rose and fell, her resolve unshaken. "I do," she whispered. "I would rather face pain than never speak the truth of my heart." Kale's eyes darkened, and for the first time Alara felt a flicker of something more beneath his amusement, curiosity perhaps, or even a faint trace of something she could not name. "Bold," he murmured, "and foolish. You stand before me offering a gift you cannot protect, a love you cannot sustain, and yet you do it anyway." Alara stepped closer, the moonlight tracing the lines of her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. "I do not wish to be sustained," she said quietly. "I wish only to be honest. If you cannot return my love, I will accept it, but I cannot keep it hidden." Kale leaned forward, resting his elbows on the arms of his throne. His gaze bore into hers, searching, testing. The air between them was thick, charged with the tension of unspoken centuries. Then, as if to shatter the fragile moment, he laughed again. "Very well," he said, the amusement in his voice now sharper, colder. "You have confessed. Congratulations. Do you expect me to, what? Return your foolish feelings. Mortals are not meant for kings, Lady Alara, not for me." Alara felt a bitter sting of humiliation, yet within it, a spark of something fierce began to grow. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you will regret laughing at my heart," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "One day, Kale, you will see that I am not as powerless as you think." Kale's eyes narrowed, a shadow crossing his face. For a heartbeat he looked almost wary. Then, as quickly as the emotion appeared, it vanished. He reclined again in his throne, the mask of the eternal king falling back into place. "We shall see, Lady Alara," he said softly, though there was a trace of something unspoken in his words. "We shall see." Alara turned, her cloak swirling around her as she left the hall. Each step away from him was heavy with both disappointment and determination. The night seemed colder as she walked the corridors, the weight of her confession settling in her chest. And yet beneath it all, a fierce, unyielding flame burned, a promise to herself, to her heart, and perhaps in time to him. Outside, the moonlight bathed the castle in silver. Alara paused at the balcony, gazing out at the cliffs that plunged into darkness below. Her thoughts swirled with visions of the future, not one of submission or despair, but of power, cunning, and a reckoning that even Kale might not see coming. She did not notice the shadow behind her until it moved, silent and swift. Kale had followed her unseen, lingering just beyond the torchlight. He watched her silently, the breeze tossing her hair around her face, and for the first time in centuries he felt an unfamiliar sensation, an ache, almost human, almost fragile. He had laughed at her confession, yes, but something about her courage, her defiance, and her vulnerability had unsettled him. Perhaps he had underestimated the heart of a mortal, or perhaps, after centuries of solitude, he had simply forgotten what it meant to be seen. Alara turned suddenly, sensing a presence, and their eyes met across the cold night air. She did not speak, only held his gaze, a silent challenge burning in her eyes. Kale inclined his head slightly, a gesture both acknowledging and warning. Then, without another word, he retreated into the shadows, leaving her alone with the wind and her racing heart. That night, Alara lay awake in her chamber, her mind alight with plans and possibilities. She would not allow herself to be crushed by a laugh, nor dismissed by centuries of power. Kale's amusement had sparked something in her, a desire to rise, to grow, and perhaps, one day, to make him see that love was not weakness but strength. And far away in the silent throne room of the Vampire King, Kale leaned back in his chair, staring into the darkness. For the first time in countless years, he could not sleep. Something had shifted, a small, dangerous flicker of humanity, sparked by a mortal heart that dared to challenge him. And deep down, he could not deny that the thought both frightened and intrigued him. The night stretched on, endless and quiet, carrying with it the promise of storms yet to come. And in that quiet, both mortal and immortal hearts began a slow, inevitable dance, one of longing, defiance, and the first whispers of a love that neither could yet fully understand. Alara had spoken her truth, and Kale had laughed, but the story was far from over. Somewhere in the shadows of the castle, a reckoning was waiting, and neither of them would escape its pull unscathed. The first light of dawn struggled through the jagged peaks surrounding the castle. Mist clung to the valleys, curling like restless spirits over the forest floor. Lady Alara sat by her window, tracing patterns in the condensation with her fingertips, her thoughts restless and burning. Last night's confession still echoed in her mind, the laughter of Kale, the vampire king, and the strange, fleeting flicker she had glimpsed in his eyes. She knew she could not remain the same. Alara's heart was no longer simply bruised, it had hardened, shaped by both longing and determination. She would not let Kale's amusement define her. If the immortal king thought a mortal heart could be dismissed so easily, he would soon learn how dangerous courage and love could become when forged together. The castle corridors were quiet, save for the occasional distant footsteps of servants beginning their daily duties. Alara moved silently, her cloak brushing the cold stone floor, her mind focused on the path ahead. She would learn, she would grow stronger. She would become a force he could not ignore, not through charm, not through beauty, but through wisdom, cunning, and the magic that had lain dormant in her blood for generations. Her first step was to visit the ancient library hidden deep beneath the castle. The air there was thick with dust and the scent of old parchment, the walls lined with shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly into the shadows. Candles flickered faintly, revealing titles written in languages forgotten by most of the living. Alara's fingers traced the spines of books until she found what she sought, a collection of sorceress texts, whispered to contain secrets of power and protection, spells and charms that could bend the currents of fate if used with care. As she delved into the texts, the hours passed unnoticed. Her mind raced, absorbing knowledge, learning how to channel her own latent abilities, and preparing herself for a confrontation that she knew would come one day. Kale had laughed at her love, yes, but that laughter had sparked something far more potent than sorrow. It had awakened a fire she could not extinguish. And Kale had begun to think of her, though he would not admit it, even to himself. From his throne room high above the castle, he watched the mortal girl who dared to challenge centuries of indifference. Something about her courage unsettled him. She was small, fragile in body, yet her spirit was fierce, sharp, and unyielding. In centuries past, he had seen countless mortals bow, beg, and tremble before him, offering obedience, loyalty, even love. And yet, here was one who offered both love and defiance, wrapped into a single mortal heart that refused to break. Kale's interest, at first reluctant and wary, grew. He found himself lingering in the shadows of the hallways, listening to her footsteps, observing her routines. There was an elegance to the way she moved, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate even in her solitude. And there was a spark in her eyes, fierce, untamed, that made him question a truth he had held for centuries, that he could not be touched by mortal hearts. Days passed, and with them came subtle changes. Alara learned to weave small charms, to summon light in the darkest corners of the castle, to listen to the whispers of the wind for hints of danger. Kale, intrigued, began to test her, sending challenges disguised as trials. A minor task in the court, a puzzle from the library, a riddle meant to confuse and frustrate, each one she solved with patience and cunning. Each victory strengthened her and unknowingly drew Kale deeper into fascination. One evening, a summons arrived. Alara, cautious but curious, made her way to the throne room. Kale awaited, his expression unreadable, as though he had been expecting her arrival all along. "Lady Alara," he said, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying a note of something unspoken. "You have been busy these past days. Tell me, have you learned anything useful or merely wasted your mortal time?" Alara held his gaze, unflinching. "I have learned more than I could have imagined, Your Majesty. Knowledge is power, and power can be used wisely or carelessly." Kale tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. Wisely or carelessly, an interesting choice of words. And what would you consider wise? Alara's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. using one's strength to protect, to prepare, and to shape the future. Not for petty revenge, but for survival and perhaps one day for justice. The flicker of something almost human passed through Cale's eyes, a shadow of respect or perhaps curiosity. Justice, mortals are so easily blinded by it, he murmured, yet he did not dismiss her. That alone unsettled her more than any anger could. Over the following weeks, their encounters became a delicate game. Cale would pose questions or present challenges, testing her intellect and patience. Ilara responded with cleverness, resilience, and an unspoken edge of defiance. And though he never admitted it, Cale began to notice the small things. The way her hair caught the moonlight, the subtle tilt of her head when she concentrated, the unwavering fire in her eyes when she spoke of her ambitions. The tension between them grew, unspoken yet palpable. In the courtyard, under the pale glow of the moon, they sparred with words instead of swords, each teasing, challenging, and provoking the other. The air seemed to shimmer around them, charged with the silent energy of hearts and wills colliding. Neither could deny the pull, the fascination, the irritation, the undeniable connection that threaded through every glance and every word. One night, the castle was threatened. A shadow from Cale's past, a vengeful spirit bound by ancient sorcery, slipped into the halls, seeking to harm the kingdom. Guards were powerless against it, their weapons passing through the spirit like smoke. Cale appeared, his eyes dark and sharp, but even he hesitated, sensing the cunning and danger of the creature. Ilara, observing from the shadows, realized that the lessons she had learned were not mere exercises. They were preparation. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, chanting softly under her breath. The air around her shimmered, responding to her will, and the spirit recoiled at the magic she wielded. Cale, impressed despite himself, moved swiftly to strike, and together they forced the shadow back into the abyss from which it had come. In the aftermath, the castle was quiet, the danger gone, but the night's events had shifted something irreversible. Cale, standing beside her, did not speak immediately. He merely observed, as though seeing her for the first time, not as a mortal subject, not as a girl who had confessed foolish love, but as an equal in intellect and courage, someone who had earned his attention in a way few ever could. "You are more than I expected," he finally said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Clever, brave, and not afraid to act when others would falter. You have potential." Ilara's heart thumped in her chest, a mix of pride and caution. "I am still learning, Your Majesty. There is much I do not know, and even more I must prepare for." Cale's gaze lingered on her, intense and unreadable. "You have changed, Lady Ilara. Something has shifted in you, and perhaps in me as well." Ilara met his eyes, her own steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "Then we are both learning," she said softly. The wind whispered through the battlements, carrying with it the scent of distant storms and the promise of challenges yet to come. The castle, ancient and eternal, seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the next move in this delicate, dangerous dance between mortal and immortal. As she returned to her chambers, Ilara could not shake the feeling that something had begun between them, a connection that neither laughter nor fear could fully erase. She had confessed her love, and though it had been mocked, it had not been destroyed. Instead, it had transformed, sharpening into something stronger, more complex, and far more compelling. And Cale could not stop thinking of her. Her courage, her defiance, her brilliance, it gnawed at him, a quiet, insistent echo in the corridors of his immortal mind. He had laughed, yes, but laughter had never felt so hollow, nor had a mortal heart ever felt so dangerous to his carefully ordered eternity. The tension between them was no longer simple amusement or scorn. It had evolved into something neither of them could name, something that hovered at the edges of thought, teasing and provoking. Desire, respect, curiosity, and defiance, all intertwined, forming a web that drew them ever closer, even as both remained cautious, wary of the power each could wield. Alara lay awake that night, planning, preparing, and imagining. One day, Kale would understand her heart fully, and when that day came, she would no longer be the girl who confessed love only to be laughed at. She would be the force he could not ignore, the spark that had awakened both admiration and fear in the vampire king himself. And Kale, alone in the throne room, stared into the shadows, aware for the first time in centuries of a pull he could not resist. Alara was no longer merely a mortal. She was a presence, a challenge, and perhaps a promise of something he had thought lost forever: connection, warmth, and the fragile, terrifying ache of a heart that could love him despite everything. The night ended, but the story between them had only just begun. In the quiet corridors of the castle, a game of minds, hearts, and power had been set in motion. A game neither could win or lose, for it was more than rivalry or strategy. It was the beginning of something inevitable, unstoppable, and dangerously beautiful. The castle walls seemed colder that evening, as though the stones themselves had sensed the approaching danger. A shadow had crept into the kingdom, one older and darker than any Alara had faced before. It was the curse of Kale's past, a malice born from betrayal centuries ago, and it threatened to consume everything in its path. Alara walked swiftly through the corridors, her cloak fluttering behind her. She carried no weapon except the knowledge she had acquired over the past weeks and the quiet confidence that had begun to define her. Kale had summoned her, not as a guest, but as an ally. This time there would be no games, no tests. The threat was real, and their survival depended on their ability to work together. The throne room was dim, lit only by flickering torches and the cold glow of the moon. Kale stood at the center, his expression unreadable, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed his awareness of the danger. When he saw Alara enter, a faint nod acknowledged her presence, but he said nothing. Words could wait. Action could not. "You are here," he said at last, his voice low, almost a growl. "Good. The creature is more cunning than most, and it will exploit weakness wherever it finds it." Alara stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I am not weak," she said firmly, "and neither are you. Together we can stop it." Kale studied her, the moonlight glinting in his dark eyes. For centuries he had faced countless enemies, yet he found himself unsettled by the mortal woman who dared stand beside him without fear. "Very well," he said. "But if you falter, there will be consequences you cannot imagine." Alara's lips pressed into a determined line. "I do not intend to falter." The night stretched onward as they ventured into the outer corridors of the castle. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, and a cold, unnatural wind whispered warnings that only the oldest stones could interpret. The spirit of Kale's past moved like a shadow within shadows, unseen but ever present. Alara's heart pounded, not from fear but from the awareness of Kale beside her. His presence was commanding, yet silent, like a predator watching, calculating. And yet there was a strange comfort in it, a sense that despite his immortality and his power, he relied on her, trusted her, and allowed her to act. Their first encounter with the shadow came without warning. From the corner of the corridor, a shape emerged, shifting, dark, and silent. It moved with speed and precision, striking at them before they could react. Kale moved first, a blur of motion, but the creature was faster than any mortal could comprehend. Alara's voice rose in a chant she had learned from the ancient texts. Light flared from her hands, washing over the creature. It shrieked, a sound like glass breaking, and recoiled. Kale seized the moment, his power striking with precision and strength, forcing the entity back. Together, mortal and immortal, they became a force neither could have wielded alone. When the creature fled, vanishing into the shadows, Kale turned to Alara, his expression unreadable. "You are stronger than I thought," he said, his voice low, carrying a hint of wonder. Alara's chest rose and fell, her hands still glowing faintly with residual energy. "I am learning," she said simply, "and I am not afraid." Kale's gaze lingered on her, sharp and penetrating. Fear is not always weakness, he said slowly. But bravery without caution can be dangerous. She met his eyes unflinching, and yet sometimes it is necessary. A silence fell, heavy and charged, as though the castle itself held its breath. The tension between them was undeniable, an invisible thread that pulled tighter with every glance, every shared effort, every brush of hands as they maneuvered through the darkened halls. They were allies, yes, but the air between them carried something deeper, something neither dared name aloud. Hours passed, and the castle seemed to shift around them as though alive, responding to the ancient curse that had awoken. Alara's knowledge and courage guided them through the maze of corridors, while Kale's experience and strength protected them from sudden attacks. Their partnership was seamless, a dance of shadows and light, intellect and power, mortal and immortal. During a brief pause in a deserted courtyard, Kale observed her quietly. Moonlight traced the lines of her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes, the faint glow of magic lingering at her fingertips. "You have grown," he said finally, almost reluctantly. "In days you have become remarkable." Alara turned to him, her expression calm but alert. "I learned from necessity. The world does not forgive weakness, Your Majesty." Kale's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "And yet weakness can be revealing," he murmured. Alara felt a shiver, not from cold, but from the weight behind his words. She understood that beneath his teasing and warnings lay a recognition, a reluctant admiration that made her pulse quicken. She would not let herself be distracted, not now. There were still battles to fight, still threats to overcome. Their journey brought them to the deepest chambers of the castle, a place long sealed and whispered to be forbidden. Ancient wards glowed faintly, resisting the intrusion of the curse. Alara studied them carefully, murmuring incantations as Kale watched. Together, they unraveled the enchantments, step by step, combining her skill with his centuries of knowledge. At last they entered a vast hall shrouded in darkness. The air was thick with the presence of the ancient curse. It moved silently, circling, waiting. Kale stepped forward, his shadow stretching long and commanding. "It knows us now," he said. "Be ready." The battle that followed was swift and relentless. The curse struck with precision, seeking to exploit every weakness, but Alara and Kale moved as one. Her spells, precise and controlled, forced it back, while his strength and agility cut through the darkness, protecting her and the castle itself. When it finally retreated, defeated but not destroyed, they stood side by side, breathing heavily. The silence of victory was broken only by the faint whisper of wind through the shattered windows. Kale's dark eyes met hers, and for a moment the distance between immortal and mortal vanished. "You were extraordinary," he said softly. "I misjudged you. I see now that your heart is not weakness, it is strength." Alara's chest swelled with pride, but she did not let it soften her resolve. "We are not finished," she reminded him. "It may return." Kale inclined his head, acknowledging her words, yet there was something unspoken between them, a recognition that this shared battle had changed their relationship, shifted the balance in ways neither could ignore. As they descended from the chamber, their hands brushed, a fleeting touch charged with electricity. Neither spoke, but the tension lingered, palpable and undeniable. For Kale, it was a revelation. Centuries of detachment could not shield him from the pull of her courage, her brilliance, and the stubborn, unyielding fire in her heart. Alara, aware of the intensity of his gaze, felt a stirring she had never anticipated. She had sought revenge once, had wanted to make him regret his laughter, but now she realized that something else had taken root, something far more complex and powerful. That night, in the quiet of her chambers, Alara could not sleep. The events of the day replayed endlessly in her mind. The battles, the fear, the exhilaration, and the silent moments when she had seen a hint of the man behind the king. She had grown stronger, yes, but she had also grown aware of something dangerous. the pull between her and Kale, a tension that neither battle nor distance could erase. Kale, in his own chambers, paced silently, staring into the darkness. The centuries had taught him to master emotion, to suppress desire, to laugh at mortal hearts. But Alara was different. She had entered his life like a flame in the shadow, igniting a part of him he had long thought dead. He could not stop thinking of her, could not stop analyzing her every action, her every glance, her every word. He had laughed at her confession, yes, but now he understood that her courage, her determination, and her heart were forces he could not dismiss. And yet, for all his fascination, there remained a barrier, centuries of pride, immortality, and caution that whispered of danger in allowing attachment. The night passed, heavy with unspoken words and unacknowledged longing. The kingdom, silent under the moon, seemed to hold its breath, aware of the delicate, perilous dance between mortal and immortal. By dawn, the castle was calm once more, but the memory of the curse and the battles remained. Ilara had proven herself, not only to Kale but to herself. She was no longer merely a girl who had confessed love only to be laughed at. She was a force, a partner in battle, a presence he could not ignore. And Kale could not forget the courage, the brilliance, or the fire in her eyes. For the first time in centuries, he wondered what it meant to care, to feel, to be touched by a mortal heart that refused to yield. The story between them had grown more complex, more dangerous, and infinitely more compelling. The game of hearts and power had deepened, and neither of them could turn away. Their connection, forged in shadow and danger, had become a thread neither could sever, weaving a tapestry of tension, admiration, and unspoken desire that would shape the battles and the nights to come. The kingdom slept, but the storm was far from over. The first light of dawn struggled through the tall towers of the castle, painting the stone walls in soft gold. Outside, the kingdom lay quiet, but inside, an uneasy tension lingered like a storm waiting to break. Kale and Alara stood in the grand hall, facing a threat older than either of them, a curse that had haunted Kale's line for centuries. It was no ordinary enemy. It was a shadow born of betrayal, rage, and unfinished history, and tonight it demanded reckoning. Alara's hands rested lightly on her staff, a conduit of the magic she had honed in secret. Every lesson, every challenge, every whispered spell had prepared her for this moment. Yet, beneath the calm surface, her heart beat with both fear and anticipation. Standing beside Kale, she could feel the weight of the centuries in his presence, the raw power that made him king and predator alike. And she could feel something else too, a strange, fragile connection, a thread of understanding that had grown between them over these weeks. Kale's eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers. For centuries he had trusted no one, allowed no one close. Yet now, in the presence of this mortal who dared defy him, he felt a rare clarity. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, steady, commanding. Alara nodded. "I am." "We face this together." The shadows stirred, sensing their resolve, and the air itself seemed to grow colder. It slithered across the floor, twisting and coiling like smoke, whispering curses that clawed at the mind. The hall seemed to stretch endlessly, the ceiling vanishing into darkness, the torches flickering as though fearful of the entity that had returned. Kale stepped forward first, his movements precise, controlled, and deadly. The shadow lunged, but he was faster, his power striking like lightning, forcing it back. Alara followed with her magic, weaving light and protection into a net of power that slowed the creature's advance. Together, they were unstoppable. Every strike, every spell, every movement synchronized in perfect harmony. The shadow hissed and shrieked, a sound like ice breaking, but it could not overcome the union of mortal cleverness and immortal strength. In a rare moment of stillness, Kale's gaze found Alara's. There was no need for words. Everything had passed between them in that glance. Trust, respect, admiration, and something deeper, unspoken but undeniable. For the first time in centuries, Kale allowed himself to see the mortal not as fragile or fleeting, but as extraordinary, capable, and necessary. "You are remarkable," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Alara's cheeks warmed at the praise, though she did not falter. "We are stronger together," she replied. "I could not do this alone." The shadow, sensing its defeat, lashed out with fury. Its darkness surged, wrapping around them like a suffocating fog. Alara's magic flared, bright and unyielding, while Kale's strength met it with a force born of centuries. The hall shook, the torches flickered wildly, and for a moment the battle seemed endless. And then a sudden insight struck Alara. She recalled the final lines of the ancient incantation, words that had been buried in the texts, almost forgotten. She whispered them softly, each syllable resonating with power, and the shadow recoiled, screaming in a way that shook the very walls. Kale seized the moment. With a sweep of his hand, a surge of his immortal energy struck the curse, breaking its hold and scattering the darkness. The air cleared, leaving only silence and the faint scent of ozone. The curse was gone, defeated, not by Kale alone, nor by Alara alone, but by their combined strength. Kale exhaled, his chest rising and falling with a weight he had not felt in centuries. He turned to Alara, and for the first time there was no mask of the king, no distance of the immortal predator. There was only Kale, a man shaped by centuries, yet touched by the courage and brilliance of a mortal heart. "You have changed me," he said quietly, his voice almost tender. "I did not expect to care, to feel, to see you," Alara finished softly, understanding the truth he struggled to voice. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. There was no threat, no enemy, no darkness, only the quiet realization that between them something had shifted, irrevocable and profound. Kale stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet not frightening, commanding yet protective. "I laughed at your love once," he admitted, his gaze dark and intense, "and I regret it. Not because you were wrong, but because I did not understand my own heart." Alara's hands trembled slightly, though her voice remained steady. "Then it is not too late," she said softly. "We have both changed, Kale. We have both learned." A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips, and for the first time it was genuine, free of mockery or pretense. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "perhaps there is a path we can walk together." The castle, ancient and eternal, seemed to settle around them. The walls no longer felt cold, the shadows no longer threatening. Even the wind through the towers carried a gentler song, as though acknowledging that a new balance had been reached, between mortal and immortal, between strength and vulnerability, between pride and love. But the night was not yet over. Kale's centuries of isolation, his power, and his pride still demanded reckoning. "There is one choice remaining," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "The curse is broken, but the cost of immortality is not a gift. It is a burden, and you must decide." Alara met his gaze steadily, her heart neither afraid nor faltering. "I have learned much," she said. "I know the risks, the sacrifices, but I choose to stand with you not as a subject, not as a pawn, but as an equal by your side." Kale's dark eyes softened, a rare warmth threading through them. "Then we will face it together," he said. "No more walls, no more laughter, no more distance. What comes next comes as one." The dawn light strengthened, spilling through the grand windows, illuminating the hall with a purity that had been absent for centuries. Kale and Alara stood side by side, mortal and immortal, heart and power entwined. The kingdom, silent under the golden light, seemed to recognize the union, a quiet witness to the extraordinary bond that had formed. And then, as if nature itself celebrated, a soft breeze carried the scent of distant flowers and the promise of renewal. Kale extended a hand, a gesture of both trust and invitation. Alara placed her hand in his, and in that moment, centuries of isolation, centuries of caution, melted away. The storm of the past was behind them. The kingdom was safe, the curse defeated and the bond between them frail once, yet now unbreakable, was forged in fire, shadow, and courage. "You have changed me," Kale said again, his voice low, more private this time. "Not just tonight, but in ways I cannot name. I did not know that love could be this." Alara smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, her heart full but steady. "And you have changed me," she replied. "I came to make you regret laughter, but I have learned it is not about revenge. It is about understanding, trust, and standing together through the dark." Kale drew her closer, though not too close, respecting the boundaries of both mortal and immortal. "Then we are equals," he said, "in power, in courage, in heart, and perhaps in hope." Alara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the dawn light and the unspoken promise between them. "Hope," she repeated softly. "Yes, we will need it." The kingdom stirred with the new day, but within the castle walls, a quieter, more profound awakening had taken place. Kale and Alara had faced shadows both external and internal. They had battled curses, fear, and centuries of distance. And in doing so, they had discovered something eternal, something stronger than power, stronger than fear, stronger than the laughter of centuries past, the courage to love, to trust, and to transform. The sun rose fully, bathing the castle in warm light. Mortals and immortals alike began their day, unaware of the quiet, monumental change that had taken place. Kale and Alara stood together, mortal and immortal, past and future intertwined, hearts aligned in a bond neither time nor shadow could sever. For the first time in centuries, Kale did not feel alone. And for the first time, Alara knew that her love, once dismissed and mocked, had become something far greater, a force capable of transforming both hearts and kingdoms. As they walked through the castle together, side by side, the world seemed to hum with possibility. The story that had begun with a confession and a laugh had reached its reckoning. Yet even as one chapter closed, another awaited, full of promise, of challenge, and of love that would endure beyond mortal time. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the kingdom, the wind carried a whisper,